One of the biggest criticisms that Epic Mickey received was its bad camera. But today we're not going to be fixing the camera, we're going to be doing something much cooler with it. What if the camera was actually a restriction to seeing things that are hidden just out of the player's sight? Well, we have a special tool to answer to that, and it's called Free Camera. And there's a lot of things to find with Free Camera, so let's not waste any time and head over to the European boat ride and find out what's going on with these boats here. These boats are emerging from the doors to the right and having their trip cut short by a whirlpool sucking them in. But if we use Free Camera to look under the map, then you'll discover that the boats are actually just being teleported back to behind the gate where they come from. Which means that the game isn't constantly spawning more boats, you're just seeing the same few boats over and over again. The same thing applies to the other whirlpools that you come across throughout Gremlin Village too. And in the room before the Asian boat ride where you have to spin the valves to open the gate to meet Small Pete, there's an inconspicuous vent on the wall. But behind this vent is a single spatter floating in the air, which isn't the only blotling in the game that we'll find floating in the air, but we'll get to that later. What makes this spatter even more unique than it already is that if you manage to get Mickey on top of the vent here and aim the cursor at it, the cursor will turn green, which means that this spatter is considered a friendly creature even though he's not painted in. Now let's jump back ahead to the clock tower, which is the first boss fight in the game. Normally the camera in this area is very restricted, which makes it all the more interesting to look at from a different perspective. Just zooming out the camera will reveal that this area is really small, and it only really covers what the player is allowed to see. And now would probably be a good time to explain something about the Free Camera tool. See, normally the game unloads things that are out of the player's sight to save on resources, and loads them back in when the player is looking at them. But Free Camera is completely separate from the game's camera, which means that if you take the camera a little too far, things won't load in properly. So because of this quirk, we can see what it would look like if the clock tower's arms were completely thinned out without having them break, which is pretty cool. If any of that doesn't make sense, then don't worry, because for the sake of the video I'm gonna make sure that that won't get in the way. But anyway, there's still some more stuff to find here, which is surprising considering how much of a small world this area is. Out of curiosity, I looked behind the clock tower's head to see if there was a record player, but unfortunately his head is completely empty. But we are able to see the back of the clock tower's head to find this texture, which is normally pretty hard to see. Well, I suppose it's time to move on to the next area. So I'll just go ahead and beat the clock tower and take the projector to Mean Street. Behind the Walt Disney statue and all of the projectors is Dark Beauty Castle looming over the horizon, which might not be very groundbreaking in itself, but I can turn this into a mini game design lesson if we use the Free Camera to get closer. It turns out that this is actually a 3D model with no backface culling. If a model doesn't have backface culling, that means that you can see straight through it from one side, which you can see is the case with the castle here. But the fact that this is a 3D model in the first place is also pretty interesting to me, because sometimes games make background elements like this flat 2D images to save a little bit of resources. Even in Epic Mickey 2, this is the case with the same location in Main Street North. But Free Camera discoveries in Epic Mickey 2 will have to wait its turn. Something else that's kinda cool is with the skybox. It turns out that the skybox's location always follows Mickey, which we can see if we zoom the camera way out like this. There's probably other games that have done this technique, but I haven't seen it before, so I thought it was cool. Now let's go to Oztown, home sweet home. Even in Mickey's own house, there's something to find with Free Camera. Just behind the single room where Mickey is allowed to walk around in is a single gear floating in the skybox, which would appear to be the same gear that shows up when the telephone is disassembled, if the player chooses to let Prescott into Mickey's house. So it would seem like the gear is just moved into the correct location after the phone is disassembled rather than having it spawn in. That's all I have to show for Oztown, so let's go to Mickey Junk Mountain. In the Heaps, which is the first area of Mickey Junk, you can jump across some junk to find a caged gremlin on top of a drum in the middle of the thinner sea. But what this drum is hiding is that under the thinner, the bottom of the drum is not only completely modeled, but there's even a unique texture for the bottom face of the drum, all of which is normally impossible to see in-game. Here's a comparison for the two faces of the drum so you can tell the difference. After you exit the airlock with the paint and thinner pump, Mickey has to navigate around a Beetleworks factory. And inside of the factory, there's some thinner being sprayed out of thin air. Obviously, it's impossible to see inside of the factory, so I'm not sure why there's not just one but two of these thinner sprayers in here. So maybe the developers just put them there for the sound effects. Real quick, here's something similar to the boats from Gremlin Village that I talked about earlier. Just a little further ahead in the factory, Mickey has to jump across these boxes of junk. Behind the scenes, we can see that after the boxes enter the shredder, they get repositioned once they're out of the player's sight, and then they warp back up to where they get spit back out to get shredded again. So just like the boats from Gremlin Village, you're really just seeing the same boxes over and over again. Now let's go to Tomorrow City, specifically Tomorrow Square. Normally what you have to do is use TV sketches on 3 of these TV pad things to power up the trams and open the gate to get to the next area. But there's actually a 4th TV pad thing floating in the air away from the rest, and it's not even that far away from the rest of the level. I don't think it can be used because it's not lit up though. My guess as to why this is here is the developers copied and pasted this one a few times to get the other 3 TV pad things, and then moved them into the spots where they need to go. And there's another object floating in this level that you can actually see without even using free camera. It's on screen right now, can you see it? I'll bring the camera a little closer. There we go. A random gray cube floating in space probably does seem really weird, but cubes like these are actually pretty common in 3D video games. Most of the time developers use cubes to make triggers for certain parts of levels, and then hide them out of the player's sight. So this cube might have something to do with the spinning rocket ride in the center of the level, or it might have something to do with the sky tram that you can activate by painting in some gears underground. To see the next discovery, we have to be in Visit 2 of Tomorrow Square, which is when the Bloticos are attacking. This one is really cool and definitely one of my favorite discoveries in the game. Normally all you have to do is make your way to the end of this tunnel and jump in the projector to get to Space Voyage. But it turns out that far underneath this projector in the void is a second projector, which is pretty cool already, but it gets even crazier. As you can see, Mickey is able to stand on top of the projector, which means we can interact with it and enter it. But unfortunately, entering the projector just freezes the game. Let's take the projector to Ventureland. If you thought we were done with floating projectors and voids, then, well, you were wrong. Taking the camera behind the background of this level will reveal an untextured top half of a projector. This is really weird for a lot of reasons, but I don't even have a guess as to why this is here. Projectors in the game are never even seen without their bottom half, which is the craziest part to me. I wish there was more to say about this, but as cool as it is, we'll have to move on to Ventureland. Let's pay Tiki Sam a visit in his hut. It turns out that just behind the wall of this interior, there's a vase floating in the void. It looks like it was supposed to be in the back room, but apparently someone made a mistake and accidentally placed it too far back. Or maybe the developers thought the back room would look better without any other objects in it. Either way, this vase will have to live out its days in the void, knowing that it will never be seen and appreciated by any players. Anyway, the Jolly Roger probably has the most discoveries out of every other level in the game, which is crazy considering how small of an area it is. But the Captain Hook boss fight has a lot of moving pieces behind the scenes, and most of those pieces are stored inside the Jolly Roger itself. Before you start the fight with Captain Hook, you can find all sorts of parts used during the fight, including barrels, broken pieces of barrels, and Captain Hook himself, as well as the giant hook he rides on while you're climbing higher up the ship. There's also a thinned out crate floating in the thinner just next to the port of the ship. Or maybe this is the stern of the ship? Anyway, let's not forget about the animatronic crocodile. With free camera, we're able to get a much better look at him. I always thought the animatronic crocodile was really cool, but the player is never given a chance to get a very good look at him. As you can see, the crocodile has a swimming animation below the thinner, and even a specific path that he follows too. How about we let Captain Hook get a better look at the crocodile too while we're at it? After Ventureland, the next stop is Bog Easy, but let's make a quick stop in the projector you take to get there and check out this ghost banging on this door here. Taking the camera behind the level will reveal that there's a second door just behind the first one, which is obviously impossible to see normally. Both of the doors are even in sync with each other, and they open and close at the same exact time. It's crazy how even the projector levels have cool discoveries like this considering how short and small they are. Once you're finally in Bog Easy, the first thing you'll come across is the sunken steamer, which you can enter to find Lewis's badge of courage. but there's actually 2 of these badges of courage. The other one is just behind the wall, but I don't think it's possible to get to it to pick it up. If you could, then I wonder what would happen if you sold one badge and then gave the other one back to Lewis. Let's skip ahead to the Lonesome Manor Library. I thought it was kind of interesting how after you paint in these skulls, they just sit there in the void glowing and sparkling. And if you were curious, this is what the inside of Madame Leona's head looks like. Probably not so curious anymore now. Fortunately, the game still has some discoveries left in the projector levels for us. In the Mad Doctor projector, there's a couple of objects floating in the void behind the level. One of them is a lever, but what's weird about this lever is that the handle of it has a shining effect, which means that if Mickey could use his spin attack on it, it might do something. And you've probably noticed the other thing already. It's a single red e-ticket in the void. Now that I think about it, I think this e-ticket might be a distant relative to the Impossible coin from Super Mario 64. But unfortunately, this e-ticket will have to stay impossible because there's no way to get to it. Now we get to return to Mickey Junk Mountain to help Oswald fight the Shadow Blot. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that the Spatter in Gremlin Village wasn't the only floating blotling we'd come across. Well, the rest of them are all right here. There's a Slobber, 2 Spatters that are partially painted in, and Oswald, all floating in the void under the level. Fun fact is that this is the first discovery I made with the free camera tool. Anyway, once the fight starts, these blotlings and Oswald are moved to the top of the jug, where Oswald starts fighting them in the background while Mickey deals with the Shadow Blot. We can take the camera over to the jug to get a better look at what's going on, and there's quite a few funny things to check out over here. The first thing you'll notice is that there's a Spatter that T-poses in the air before jumping up to Oswald only to get punched in the face. T-poses or A-poses are basically the default pose that character models are in when they're not being animated. And since this Spatter is behind the jug away from the player's sight, the developers can get away with having him T-pose for a little while. And inside the jug there's a pretty funny discovery. Turns out there's a Spatter with his legs stretched out super far, which kinda reminds me of those stretchy sticky hand toys. Let's skip all the way to the Sleeping Beauty projector, which connects the Dark Beauty Castle lab to the throne room. A fun fact about this projector is that it's the only projector level in the game that's based on a full movie rather than a short cartoon like Steamboat Willie. Anyway, this projector is noteworthy because there's tons of black developer cubes like the one from Tomorrow Square. Some of them are different sizes or even rectangular. I think it would be safe to assume that these are used for the dragon that shows up once you're halfway through the level. Speaking of the dragon, we can see what it looks like before it's ready to swoop in. Pretty cool stuff. And I decided to save this one for last because it's pretty damn cool. This is what the full blot looks like when it's attacking Dark Beauty Castle, which normally is pretty hard to see. He might not be as big as he looks in the cutscenes, but you can't deny that this is pretty sweet. But that's all the free camera discoveries that I wanted to show for today. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a Redux video for free camera discoveries in Epic Mickey Part 2, or free camera discoveries in Epic Mickey 2. Remember to subscribe and like the video for more Epic Mickey content, and join our Discord server with the link in the description. Hopefully I'll be able to see you all there.